Let's talk about ladies' magazines in the mid-19th century. Good day everyone, my name is Caitlin. I'm a living historian who educates other living historians by teaching old-fashioned sewing skills and copying original garments. This is our segment where I kind of go into a little bit more of a research topic because once we have our clothes that we make on the channel, we obviously need to know a little bit more about the 19th century, whatever time period that we're doing, to be able to properly impersonate them, I suppose. So we're going to go through one of my old lectures that I did at the Texas Living History Association, talking about American fashion magazines, what we call fashion magazines. Really, they're ladies' magazines. We're pretty familiar with like Godey's because I do put out once a week an issue of Godey's in the shorts. We talk about Peterson's quite frequently. Those are pretty much the main two that I use on the channel frequently because those are the ones I look at the most. But there are others, and even here in other parts of the world, there are ladies' magazines. Like there's the Blackwoods Lady magazine in England. There was English Women's Domestic magazine was another one. There's tons of French ones. Le Bon Temps, Magazine de la Mode was one, I believe. And I know I'm not pronouncing any of these correctly. Mode de Paris is the one. There's one about Paris fashions. Yeah, there's a ton of French magazines. In fact, most of the English and American magazines got their ideas from French ones. So if you actually start looking, De Bazaar is a German one. I do know that one. There is a German one at least. Specifically the French ones. You'll see the illustrations in the French ones like in a month or two later in an American one or sometimes a British one. Sometimes they'll change the description even and say, oh, the French one said this was a dinner dress. They'll say, oh, this is a nice evening gown. Like they'll try to make it different. But the 19th century was not as big into... Plagiarism wasn't as big of a no-no, it doesn't seem like. Or at least, it was considered a bad thing, but it was hard to get caught. So it's fairly common to see things like that. So they all kind of feed off each other, but even the American magazines would recognize that French fashions were Americanized before it being introduced. So they are slightly different, but they do all take inspiration from Paris. So that's kind of where all this fashion stuff starts. And then it just gets a little bit more localized when it hits America. And then depending on where you are, there may be like local fads that don't necessarily translate to like the wide array of fashions. I get asked pretty commonly when I do my getting dressed videos or something, like what type of people were wearing, like what they want to know is what race of people or what group of people were wearing these clothes. And that's a very hard question to answer because really so many people were wearing these clothes. I mean, these same types of clothes, the same layers, the same overall lines were being worn in France, Germany, Russia, England, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, America. It wasn't these particular type of people were wearing these clothes and everybody else was wearing other things. The fashions I mostly show are Americanized versions of global fashions. Now there are groups of people who did not adapt the normal clothes. So some indigenous groups, for instance, did wear white people clothing and some of them did not. There are places in Scotland, like the Fishermen's Wives, who had their own sort of set of fashion that they particularly enjoyed to wear. There are very rural areas throughout the world who are wearing a little bit more localized fashions. But on the things that I speak of, it's really hard to narrow down a group of people who are wearing these clothes because I am wearing Americanized versions of these clothes, but these types of clothes, like the same basic lines where the shapes are, the layers, they are being worn throughout most of the world. But today I want to introduce you to the topic of ladies' magazines because there's so much more beyond fashion magazines. So the title of my presentation was More Than a Fashion Magazine because so many people think of Godey's or think of Peterson's or even think of the French ones and all they know are the fashion plates. And I think there are people out there who think that these are magazines that are literally just pages and pages of fashion plates, and that is absolutely not the case. In fact, the fashions are a very small portion of the magazines. So I'm going to let you see my presentation and we'll go through it together. At the end, I'm going to show you an entire issue of Godey's and then an entire issue of Peterson's so you can see like what is actually included in an issue. So getting started. Here are some of the ones that are available in America. These would be the most popular ones in America. So we have Godey's Ladies Book, which is the quintessential, like I think most people know of Godey's Ladies Book. It was started in 1830. It was called the Ladies Book back then. And somewhere in the later 1830s, I believe it was around 1838-ish, they renamed it Godey's Ladies Book. Louis A. Godey was the fashion editor of the magazine. He was until he sold the magazine in the 1870s. Which at that point the new owners just called it Godey's Magazine, and it ceased publication in 1898. Another popular one was Graham's Magazine. It was started in 1840. It went to 1858. It was a very short-lived magazine. We have Peterson's Magazine, which started in 1842, went to 1898, same as Godey's. Godey's and Peterson's were really more or less rivals in the sense they were the two most popular American ladies' magazines of the day. Both of them at certain points do claim to have the most subscribers. They're pretty much on par. And with a lot of these ladies magazines, and really magazines in general, it wasn't that women subscribed to just one. I've seen a lot of references to subscribing to more than one, so you got more ideas, more stories, more fashions. Or, which is even more common, everybody would subscribe to one, but the group of friends, they would all subscribe to different ones. So then they could share all the magazines, but only had to pay for one each, which Godey's really hated, and we'll get into that later. There's Arthur's Home Magazine, which was started in 1852. It also went into 1898. Arthur's was one of the ones that Godey's liked. We'll go into it a little bit more later, but sometimes Godey's and Arthur's were actually sold together as part of a group, I suppose. And then Harper's Magazine started in 1850, and it is still going on today. So those are the 5 most common ladies' magazines that we see in America at this time. Again, other places of the world are going to have their own, like again, Blackwood's, which I think is early 19th century for England. There's the English Woman's Domestic Magazine, which I do know is mid-19th century. So many French ones. Der Bazaar is the German one that I know of. There are probably more, and I'm sure there are other magazines from other places in the world that I'm just not aware of. So let's start with Godey's Ladies Book. This is probably, again, the one most people know. I used to own an entire collection of 1850s and 1860s ladies books that were to one lady, and unfortunately in college I sold it, which was, I regret that decision a lot, even though I sold it because I didn't have the space or the ability to properly store all that paper, and paper goes bad very quickly if you are not storing it correctly, or it can, and I didn't have the acid-free tissue paper, and I could see with even the 2 years that I owned it, there was some deterioration, so I decided to let it go. I was not able to give it the home it deserved, unfortunately. Anyway, they had covers. The covers would change every decade, so you would have like the 1860s cover, which looked different from the 1850s cover, which looked different from the 1840s cover. I actually really loved the covers. If you actually look at them, the very, very top over there, it would have the month written down. I believe this one says, it may say October. And then there's usually a little quote about how good Godey's is and how everyone loves Godey's. And then you have these beautiful scenery. You have Godey's Ladies Book. It says edited by Sarah J. Hale, L.A. Godey. It says the volume number, which the volume number is going to be per half year. So like January through June is a volume, and then July through December is another volume. But they are sold in individual issues, so you would get one every single month. The big books that you see were people who loved the magazine so much that they would take their individual issues, and at the end of 6 months or at the end of the year, they would go to a bookbinder and have them bound together. So that is not how they came. Those big old bound volumes that we see everywhere, that's not how they came. They were put that way by the person who subscribed to the magazine, and generally these would be like coffee table magazines. Like you could just flip through past fashions or something, just something to look through or something to read when you're bored in the parlor, I suppose, or you had guests or anything. Anyway, so that's the volume number, and then you have the year right here. And does say Louis, or it says Louis. I don't know if he pronounced it Louis or Louis. I've never actually looked into that. A. Godey, and then there's Philadelphia, which is where the magazine was published. So this is Mr. Godey right here. He's an interesting character. He was born in 1804. He passed away in 1878. He actually, again, sold the magazine the year before he died, so it was 1877. I think I said 78 earlier. That's when he passed away. He was the editor, fashion editor, essentially. He was a very shrewd businessman and did not care for anything that didn't make him money, and didn't care for anyone not knowing his proper title or giving someone else's title. So it was fairly common for people to address Mrs. Hale, who we'll get to in a moment, as the fashion editress, and Godey occasionally had little temper tantrums over, she is not the fashion editress, I am the fashion editor. How many times must we say this? He didn't care to have his title asserted. So he was an interesting character, but he put together a very wonderful magazine. And then we have Mrs. Hale, absolutely lovely Mrs. Hale. She was born in 1788, passed away in 1878 at the age of 90. She came into Godey's Ladies Book again in the 1830s and pretty much drastically changed how the magazine was being put together and made it super popular. Now, you may not actually know who Mrs. Hale is. Mrs. Hale is an amazing, amazing woman, very upstanding member of society, good Christian woman. She wrote several hymns. In fact, if you look, I was actually in church the other day and we weren't singing one of her hymns, but on the other page, it had a hymn and it said Sarah J. Hale. And I was like, I wonder if that's actually Mrs. Hale. So I took a picture of it in church and I looked it up and it was one of her hymns. It was so cool. It made me super happy. I was like, I know her. I don't actually know her, but I kind of know her. Anyway, she also petitioned to have Thanksgiving as a national holiday. If you've ever heard, I'm sure most of us English-speaking people have heard that little children's song, Mary Had a Little Lamb. She wrote that in the 1840s. She is the authoress of that. She's a very strong moral character. Now, while she was opposed to women's suffrage, she was very big into supporting women's financial independence, women's financial equality. Big promoter of women in the workspace. She would often have articles about women physicians or women postmasters, just like praising these women and going, yes, this is something women should and can do. You know, people would write to her and say, I am a young lady, I have these qualifications, I would like a position in this. She would advertise for them so they could find a position. She was very big into, again, financial independence. She was a widow. She raised her kids on her own, never remarried. But she was very big into women and women's equal pay, women's rights, in that sort of manner. Godey's is particularly famous for, at least in the 1850s and past then, for their double fashion plate. So it would be a double page instead of, let's see, I gotta remember, I think the Godey's Ladies Book are like 9 inches tall by 6 inches wide. And so it would be 9 by 12 would be the fashion plate and just kind of folds out. What are you going to find if you look into an issue of Godey's? There are these intro plates, they're black and white plates. There's typically 2 of them. One is just a pretty artistic plate, and the other one is typically an illustration of one of the stories in that issue. It's just like a quick little plate. You always have fashions for the month. There's usually, again, that one giant colored plate. The rest are going to be black and white plates. Godey's included 2 pages of music each time. Many of them are composed specifically for Godey's. Not all of them were. A lot of times, especially in the 1860s and 1850s, we'll see a new alphabet to embroider each time. So if you had handkerchiefs or really whatever you wanted, you'd have a new type of embroidery to practice. Stories and poetry. This is actually going to be the bulk of the magazine. Are stories and poetry. Typically, they are submitted by the readers of the magazine, and Mrs. Hale, again, being for the majority of women's rights, would publish works from her readership. It's a good way to get noticed in that sort of thing, or just have your work published as a woman. But a lot of these readerships are very young ladies, teenagers, young adults. For many of them, they don't come across as simple, but they do come across as if a teenager or a young adult, a very well educated by our standards, teenager or young adult wrote them. But they don't have the same sentence structure, they don't have the same wording as I would see in like a typically published book of the time, if that makes sense. Although occasionally Godey's would do other things. So they would have scientific articles, and sometimes it would be like a scientist or a doctor who was writing the article. Occasionally they would have very famous authors, and they would take their books and put them into like a serial type of thing. So Charles Dickens, at least, I forget which book it was, but it was in Godey's for a while, and it was just like a chapter every single month. So you had to wait, a year or so to get the entire book. But it was, you got to read a little bit more every month. Towards the end of the book, you typically get like the novelties, which is going to be more fashions, and then work. So it's going to be like projects to do, like knitting, crochet, basketry, work baskets. Sometimes patterns are included. And then you get the back of the book, which I think a lot of people actually ignore the back of the book because the text is smaller, and it's just a lot, and there's no illustrations typically. But this is where you get things like your receipts, which are what they would call recipes. You get house plans. There's the juvenile court work department, which sometimes had like science experiments. And then towards the very end, you'd get the editor's notes. So like there were published books, which we'll go through. It's like that is how women could get books or sheet music that was recently published. Godey's was advertising for these places, and women could send in money, and I want this, this, this. and they would be sent these brand new books. So in that way, it's kind of like a Steers catalog, because you can order things through Godey's as well. It's not just the fashions, it's not just the stories you get to read, it's not just the poetry, it's not just the projects or the patterns, but you can actually send for things as well and pay for them and get them sent to you. So things that need to Godey's. Again, Godey's was extremely popular. They generally did publish stories from the readership. That is not true of all ladies' magazines, but it is fairly true for Godey's the majority of the time. I would consider Godey's liberal for its time, especially for Mrs. Hale's thoughts on female doctors, female postmistresses, all of that. Included house or building plans in every issue, which are some of my favorite things to look at. I absolutely adore them. They did, again, have that double page colored fashion plate starting in the early 1850s. Mostly original sheet music, not all the time, but typically. They had close to 150,000 subscribers by 1859. Godey's also was fairly famous that during the Civil War it did not take a side, it did not talk politics, it did not say anything about the war to not upset either side of their readership. The only things that they got close to talking about the war is at least every other year or so, they would talk about mourning fashions, and just, this will be a great interest to all of our readers. And that's just as close as they got to touching the war situation. Godey was fairly good at making money, and he knew that that was a way to not upset anybody. Now we have Arthur's Home Magazine. This is the 1860s book cover. The cover changed periodically. I didn't notice that it changed in the decades like Godey's did. We have Timothy S. Arthur, who was a popular author of the time. He was born in 1806, died in 1885. And then he was supported by Virginia F. Townsend. She was an author and a teacher, born in 1836, and she died in 1920. They have plates only in black and white. It was a lot cheaper to do it that way. So a summary of authors. You're going to see most of these are going to be very similarly set up to Godey's, because Godey's was extremely popular, and so everyone just kind of emulated that. So we have the intro plates, again, black and white plates. They would sometimes illustrate a story in that issue. They would have all fashions in black and white plates. There were projects, usually black and white plates showing the issue's projects. And then later on, you'll see even down here, work table, which is the description of the project. So you'd have the plates up front, but the descriptions and the directions in the very back of the issue. You have stories. Generally, these are going to be published by author himself or by famous authors of the day. So it's not, again, the readership putting in their stories or their contributions. It's going to be mostly Mr. Arthur or other famous authors. They had little departments, so you learn what is new or what is interesting or what is being talked about in certain areas. So there was a mother's department talking about raising children. There was the health department talking about how to keep healthy or hygiene and things like that. There was always a little section called Treasury, or Boys and Girls Treasury. It was it was basically the juvenile department of Godey's. It has little stories. Sometimes it science experiments. Sometimes it was more here's how to draw something, like directions in drawing and art. And there's also a little section called Hints to Housekeepers. And then you get the work table, which is the description of projects and the fashions above. You get new publications, same like Godey's, you could send for things. And then you would have the editor's department, which is mostly poetry, and then notices to subscribers, things like that. Things unique to Arthur's. It was specifically modeled after Godey's ladies' book. Godey's frequently endorsed and advertised for Arthur's Home Magazine, and even they would be sold again together occasionally. You could purchase both. Again, purchase as a club with other magazines. Usually it was Godey's and or Harper's Magazine. So let's go ahead and speak about Harper's. So here's an 1880s book cover. The cover style stayed basically the same all the way through that I could find. The Harper's brothers are Fletcher, James, John, and Joseph Harper. They are the editors and the ones who put the magazine together. Harper's is still published today. It looks very different from what it did when the Harper brothers were in charge. And it is technically award-winning. Pages upon pages of awards have been won. Modern Harper's, from what I can tell, is nothing like period Harper's. So things unique to Harper's. It gained 50,000 subscribers in the first 6 months of publication, so it was very popular very quickly. It was much more scholarly than the other magazines. It had a lot more historical and scientific literature. The museum that my husband works at, the Pierce Museum, actually has a good many of the 1850s and 1860s Harper's, again, bound. So it's the full ones that you would have gotten issues and so on, bound them. And I think actually binding them makes a lot more sense with things like Harper's because they are more scientific and historical in nature. They're not as fashion which is ever changing, so it makes sense to like have this as like a coffee table book or something. There are very few illustrations, it is very word heavy, but it is very good information and it's very interesting to read. But again, there's no fashions, no projects. It would occasionally include fictional writings, but generally it was nonfiction. Again, a lot of scientific literature, a lot of historical things. So now let's talk Peterson's magazine. So the cover style changed over the years. It wasn't changed on the regular, but just over the years. Charles J. Peterson is the person who mostly put in charge. He was born in 1818, died in 1887. And we have George R. Graham from 1813 to 1894. They did have colored plates as well, which makes them a little bit more on par with Godey's, but they were single page colored fashion plates. If you go through Peterson's, you have the intro, which has the black and white plates. You have the monthly fashions, which have the one color and the rest black and white plates. You have stories and poetry. Sometimes they are put in by the readership. Sometimes it is famous authors. You have the work table, which is, I don't know why I didn't have a picture of Mrs. Weaver on here too. Anyway, the work table is mostly put together by Mrs. Jane Weaver. A lot of the patterns are things that she collected and put together. There's always the editor's table, which is, again, includes book publications, subscription notices, etc. There's a section called Fireside Amusements, which was crafts and games to play, receipts for food, for the house, all that sort of thing. So, like we would say recipes, and we would almost always consider that to be a food recipe. They use the word receipt, as I said before. That doesn't change until the later part of the 1860s where we start seeing the word recipe. By the 1880s, I see recipe almost universally at that point. But receipts also just meant for other things. You could have household receipts or like laundry receipts. Today, I think we would more or less use the term like DIY laundry soap or homemade laundry soap than saying laundry soap recipe or laundry soap receipt, even though it is a recipe. So I do find that to be a little bit different from how we would typically say it today. And they have fashion, so it's like a whole commentary page of here's the fashions that we see, this is what's new, things like that. So other than fashions, as we've discussed, there are embroidery designs, there are receipts, there are stories of all sorts, sometimes with historical tidbits or scientific tidbits. You get up-to-date news and advertisements, you get crafts, patterns, etc. So there's so much more rather than just fashions, even though we like to call them fashion magazines. So let's talk about the embroidery designs. Godey's especially had designs printed all over the book, but other magazines had them too. So Godey's was fairly, I don't know, when I look at Godey's, and they would have like a half page left over after a article or a poem or something. Sometimes there's just like a little embroidery pattern sitting there, and it just says, you know, design for an infant shirt, or design or pretty design for silk. It just look a little random design. Oftentimes they will tell you that they're for an infant shirt or for a petticoat or for a handkerchief, but they will not tell you what medium of fabric and thread to use. So that is something that they kind of expected you to know. The 19th century was very big. They didn't hold your hand and explain everything down to the T like we are accustomed to our directions doing today. They expected you to be educated enough to know that if you're making a petticoat, it's going to be of this type of fabric and you are using this type of thread and this weight of thread. They expected you to know all that already. They don't say it. So for us who are not educated in the 19th century manner, we do have to look at originals to figure out what they were using for these applications and then figure out what the modern equivalents are. It is a little bit more of a challenge for us. Here are some examples of embroidery patterns. We have patterns for a Christmas slipper. That was, I believe that one was Godey's. I think these are actually all Godey's. Here's another one. Again, you see a little bit of a story and it just says embroidery. So handkerchief border for a child's skirt, for muslin. And there's embroidery for an infant skirt, and then there's a project, a letter receptacle. And then on the other end, there is a child's dress that has a braiding pattern, which would be considered an embroidery. More embroidery designs. There's patterns for silk embroidery, embroidery for an infant skirt. This other one, which is a whole page of embroidery, infant shirt pattern for chemise bands and yokes, for the skirt of a child's dress, for an infant's blanket, or inserting for sleeves. There's a little bit of a project, looks like that might be a night dress, and then they just had some space at the end of the page. So embroidery for a child's skirt, and embroidery Lily of the Valley pattern. The one doesn't even tell you where to use it. You just kind of have to know. Embroidery for sleeves of an infant's dress, embroidery for a child's apron. There's some initials. Sometimes they'd have like random names sketched out so that you couldn't copy, if it was your name or your friend's name, you could copy that out. Chemise bands on yokes, so all sorts of embroidery patterns. Here's some earlier ones. These first two are in the 1830s, and they are caps. So like this one specifically would be the front of a cap, like the frill. This would be the very back portion. It says crown, but it's really not the crown. It's like that little tip portion. This one is a crown, and then you would have a front pattern. So this is the Workwoman's Guide calls this, I think, as a helmet cap. So you see these Van Dyke pointy triangles. It fits right here. You'd have two of these, and you would have this in the middle, and that's how it kind of shapes to the head. It's a very close-fitting cap. And we have embroidery for an infant's cloak, for a chemise, for silk embroidery, for drawers, for a handkerchief, vine for a child's handkerchief, for the front of a shirt, and the receipts. So again, we get things like food, so breads, puddings, vegetables, how to make wine, how to make jam, how to put up pickles, how to make all sorts of meat. They would sometimes even have bills of fare, which is what they would call meal plans. You'd have recipes for making toiletry items like pomade or cologne, things like that. A household, like cleaners, sick management, like how to care for an invalid or a sick child, like what types of food to feed them. You have recipes for laundry, like removing all sorts of stains, anything you want. If you want to learn how to remove oil stains from a black silk dress, there's probably a recipe in there for you somewhere. And what I love about the stories, specifically from Godey's and the ones that publish from the readership specifically, is you get a really good idea of what like the average person knew about their lives and the world around them. It helps put you in a historical mindset. You get to learn random and commonplace facts that no one is writing down otherwise, but you get to see them in these stories. You get to understand what was understood about history, science, technology, etc. So you get to see there, in Godey specifically, at least in the 1850s and 1860s, many times the first article was a scientific article. There was one on ventilation in households. There was one on historical fashions. I'm trying to think how rings are made, like little finger rings. So many things that you could learn about, and it's very nice to know what was understood about their culture and about their time and their technology. You can learn a lot of that from here. You can understand how day-to-day life was spent and the different careers that one may come across. Especially with these stories, you get to see people how they structure their day as you're following these characters around. And it is almost like historical fiction, but it's not historical fiction. It's contemporary fiction of 150, 100, 200 years ago. So you're not ever going to run across an issue where some modern writer is going to accidentally insert something that is not period. What you are reading is period text, and that's what I love about it. That's why I don't read a lot of historical fiction, because I found something way better than historical fiction. It is real historical fiction. It's historical contemporary fiction. I actually rather like it. It is a lot of fun. This is pretty much the only fiction I get to read nowadays because I'm so busy researching. And this is research, but it's also fun. There are some interesting stories though. Sometimes the 19th century just, you're reading along and it's like, oh, that's a really cute story, it's adorable. And then you get the next one and it's this 20-something-old man who adopts a 5-year-old, and they go through life, and then she reaches like the age of 18, they fall in love, and then he marries her even though it's really his adopted daughter. And you're thinking, that would not fly today. That's a little strange. And then the next one is just like a happy-go-lucky little story about a township trying to get along. Like it's just so interesting, the things that you come across. And you can also see social ideals and how the society fit together. All of that you can learn from a lot of these stories. This is a particular favorite of mine. So I did say earlier that Godey's really did not like the people who borrowed Godey's. This one's from an 1850s issue and is the life and adventures of a number of Godey's ladies book, and it is literally a story written from the point of view of an issue of Godey's and how it was so mistreated and how you wouldn't want that to happen to an issue of Godey, so you need to get your own copy of Godey so that this doesn't happen to any of them. It's kind of hilarious. Anyway, it says addressed particularly to borrowers, having been taken down in shorthand from a narration made by itself when the unfortunate creature was in a dilapidated state from the treatment received at the hands of cruel oppressors. And yes, it's talking about a book. It is hilarious. It is interesting because you get to also see some of the behind the scenes things about being at the binders, how it was printed, then how it got shipped. So you get a little bit of that too, which is very interesting to me. And it's actually addressed to a schoolmaster. He gets it, and then as soon as he gets it, he's like being hounded down by all these women going, have you gotten the book yet? Have you gotten Godey's? Have you gotten it? Have you gotten it? Have you gotten it? And he's like, let me read it first. It's my book. Let me read it. And then she's coming back like every 30 minutes going, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Can I bring it? Can I take it? And eventually, you know, the fashion plates get ripped out of it. You know, a story gets ripped out of it. A stain gets put on it. And it's just, it is quite hilarious, but it also is it's very amusing. I just find it so amusing. Anyway, and the other things that you learn, like, did you know that women were being encouraged to be postmistresses in 1862? Do you know what boarding schools are well known and respected and where to send children? Do you know what books were being published and advertised and how much they cost to get a brand new book? All of these things you can learn from Godey's and from Peterson's and the other magazines. You get things like news. So it talks here about, this is the postmistress one, or one of the ones about postmistress. It talks about even in other places, like in England and France and European countries, women are frequently found in the management of the country post offices. This I consider to be appropriate and useful sphere for the educated women of our land. You get things like health department. This is to what extent shall women be educated in medicine. So it's talking about women being doctors. Of course, only of women and children, not necessarily administering medical care to men, but it's a step. It is a good step. Again, you get the crafts and patterns. Crafts and patterns as a living historian is a great way to interact with the public, especially if you have a reprint or a copy. One of the ladies' magazines and you're like showing them, oh, this came in and look, I'm working on this project today. Like, it's a very good thing to have. It teaches you how to furnish a house. You can improve your impression by creating sacks and bags instead of using modern containers at events. This one is 1859 Godey's. It's a traveling bag, so you can hold your hairbrush and your hairpins, your toothbrush, your combs, all of that. I made one several years on the channel. It was one of the first projects that we did, so it's probably 6 or 7 years old. I still use that thing. That thing is amazing. I've used it so much that the silk ribbon is almost worn through that ties it shut, and I almost need to replace it. But that thing has been a lifesaver. I absolutely love that thing. Maybe we'll remake it when it finally falls apart. They also make great gifts for fellow living historians if you end up developing fun friendships and you want to make things for your friends. These projects, these crafts are often fairly simple, fairly inexpensive, and often easy to do. Not all of them, but some of them are very easy to accomplish, and they make really good gifts. Like, here's a rabbit pincushion. Pincushions are fairly popular. It tells you how to do it. Sometimes there are patterns. Sometimes it's like, make it up from the illustration. You're smart. That's not actually what they say. They say any person of reasonable skill can make it up from the illustration, which is like one of my least favorite phrases. Saying with any seamstress of reasonable ability will be able to make this up. Apparently I'm not a seamstress of reasonable ability. Anyway, magazines. This is a French one. This is 1858. It had this is a pattern for a slipper in Berlin woolwork. And here you just see this is directions for a Bible bookmarker. There's a baby's boot. This is later 1860s. This is like a little house made of perforated card, and it's for putting your pens, like your writing pens, your writing utensils, wafers, which is another way to close letters aside from using wax, or sometimes, especially when gummed envelopes or the lickable envelopes that we have today, they were around in the 1850s and 1860s. In fact, they were very well used by the 1860s. I went through the Pierce collections, which has 17,000 diaries, documents, and letters from the American Civil War period. I could not find a single envelope with wax on it. I think we use wax way too much when we're doing Civil War interpretation. They were all gummed envelopes. I have read several times, you know, especially Godey's at one point does say, don't just trust the gummed envelopes. Always make sure you put a wafer in there too to make sure it stays closed, because sometimes the gummed ones won't stay closed. So wafers are still being used. So that's just a way to store them. It's just cute sitting on a writing desk. This is to keep a nightgown in. I keep meaning I'm going to make it, and I haven't done it yet, but I'd love it to be on the list. Little baskets were very common just to keep random things in. Sometimes it was visiting cards. Sometimes it's just a basket to sit and look pretty and to hold cut flowers. But there's so many fun projects. This is later 1860s. This is from Peterson's. It's Paris child stays. These are just made from wool, and they're done in a basket weave pattern, so it's just fabric. Very cute. A little bit more embroidery. This one is, I think, from the 1870s. It's a shoe bag, so you could like hang it in. So you would hang it in your closet and like keep your shoes. There's another basket right here. This one's made of acorns and pine burrs, and again more embroidery. This is a winter jacket in double crochet, which it does not make up like the pattern whatsoever. It looks nothing like this, but I have made it, and it's one of my favorite pieces. It's 1864, so it's appropriate to very late Civil War and post-Civil War. So how would you get a Godey's Ladies Book or a Peterson's magazine or any of the other ones? Like, how would you actually subscribe to this thing? So first, typically you would hear about the magazine either from friends, family, newspaper, or an agent would come to your house, because many of these magazines did employ agents, and these were people who were paid a certain amount of the subscription price to go and advertise or to take subscriptions. Rhett actually recently found a little card. It was from an agent. It was for a newspaper actually here in Texas, honestly. So it wasn't a ladies magazine, but it just had, you know, the agent's name, and it had who was subscribing and if payment was received, and just information. Like, I think it had his address on there too. He could send it with the money, and it was proof of the subscription, and so the newspaper or the magazine would then, you know, send it to the subscriber, and the agent would get a little bit of a kickback for that. Virginia Penny's Employments of Women, which is 1863, talks frequently about agents, like book agents or magazine agents, and how they are able to earn money. It is typically a job done by men, because some of them would travel quite far out to get new subscribers, but it was considered a very appropriate thing for women to do, particularly if they came across a magazine or a book and no one in their, you know, circle of friends or acquaintances had this. They could actually sell it just like while visiting or doing their normal day activities and earn a little bit of an extra income. Now with agents, you do have to be careful, because there were scam artists going around pretending or saying that they were agents, who would just take the money and run. And so you did have to be a little bit careful about that. And even Godey's frequently wrote, because they were getting complaints in of, well, I sent in my money for this magazine and I never received it. And Godey's was like, well, this is the way we do things. If you do not do it in this exact order, then you got scammed, essentially, and we're not at fault for that. Is basically what Godey's would say. Anyway, so after you hear about it, you could write to the editor with your payment itself, or you could pay the agent in certain situations. And again, hope that agent is an honest agent and an actual agent of the thing you're trying to subscribe to. You would wait until your subscription is processed, and then you would receive the magazine for a year before you will renew. Typically it was a year-long subscription. And then congratulations, you now have access to world news at your fingertips, and fashions and projects and all the other fun things, depending on what you subscribe to. So when do the magazines arrive? This is something I'm actually currently researching that I would love more information on, and so if anyone has diary references or just things that they know about from the mid-19th century specifically, I'm thinking like 1830 to 1880 would be really nice. My understanding is that most women receive the book before the first of the month, either in the middle of the month prior or the last week of that month, so they could prepare their wardrobe for the upcoming month. I do know that Caroline Williams, who is in California in 1858, writes that her December copy of Godey's and at least one other magazine arrived on the 1st of December. So she wasn't behind on fashion at all, and this actually was very interesting for me to read. But she specifically writes on December 1st that her December copy of Godey's arrives. So that makes me think that people like in Philadelphia or in other places closer to where Godey's was being published likely received theirs a little bit sooner. But even out in California in the West, they weren't getting the magazines much further behind. We're talking like a week or two at most, from what I understand. So again, current research does not suggest that Western areas were out of touch with the latest fashions and news. So we can find the magazines. I will put these into the links. I will put these links in the description for you. It's just HathiTrust, and so you can go and peruse all the articles. So I will actually pull up one of these for you. I'll just go to Godey's. So this is what the link I have will send you. And it has all the information for it. But then here they are. So it will tell you where the actual article is held. But they're all digital copies of everything. So here's 1831. Sometimes they'll have one or two copies of them. So like they have two copies of volume 4. One is in the University of Michigan. One is in the University of Minnesota. This is nice because sometimes, especially the earlier they get, there are often pages missing, especially fashion plates. And so sometimes having the extra, like there's actually there's 3 of volume 4. Having those, you might be able to go look at, if the first one you pull up is missing pages or missing a fashion plate or something is blurry, you can go to another volume and it might be different. But it has them all the way up until 1898, which again is when it stopped. It doesn't have every single issue, but it has the vast majority of them. And so, yeah, that's Godey's, and that's what the rest of them look like too. The Godey's is the most complete because I think that's what people collected and what they enjoyed, and so that's what we have. So real quick, let's look at Peterson's. It's a little bit less, so it starts in 1848. We have in 1849. There's not as many. We are missing 1851 for Peterson's. We have 2 for 1855. And there's some single issues. I like the single issues because then you can actually see what the average person was actually getting. So like here's the actual cover. Here's the advertisements, because you would get advertisements. There would be the cover and there would be an advertisement. And then you would have all the magazine part, and in the very back you'd have advertisement on the back cover and also on the inside back cover. And you don't always see those in the bigger ones. They would often take off the covers and just do the booklets themselves. So you sometimes don't get to see the covers, you don't get to see the advertisements when you're looking at the bound volumes. Those weren't considered as important to save. Let's look at a full issue of each of these. Starting with, I'm going to go for 1860. I'm going to go for August 1860 for both of them, just so you can see same month, same year, what a couple of different ones. We're only going to have time to go through Godey's and Peterson's because of how long I've already been talking. So here's one of the black and white plates. Just like a little cottage scene, picking apples. This one is talking about old fashions from Louis XV. Talks about, see description on a certain page. And this one it does look like it's missing its fashion plate. Here's our music project. So, this is the apron ear. These are the fancy silk apron ears. So there's several of them. Little headdress. Again, a little embroidery up here. More headdresses. That takes up a full page. Embroidery. Another headdress. This is the mat for a vase or flower glass. It tells you see description on a certain page. Night sock. Tells you how to do it. So this one actually has the directions here. Oftentimes with these patterns, it's going to be like this. It's going to be like this. It's going to have the plate up front and have the directions in the back. Here's the alphabet for this particular issue. I actually rather like this one. This is adorable. Sometimes they would do the whole alphabet in 1 month, and sometimes it was half the alphabet 1 month, and the next month you would get the other half. Patterns and embroidery, infant shirt, there's some braiding, all of that. And then we get some fashions. These are the black and white ones. This is talking about the cloak specifically. And it gives you like a brief description. So it tells you where it is from, how it is drawn. It's drawn from actual articles of, they would use the word costume. We would say they use the word costume differently than we would. Costume just meant like outfit. This is what we would say outfit. They would say costume. It tells you kind of a little bit about it. Sometimes it tells you the color and the fabric. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just tells you that it's greatly favored and people love it. So anyway, now we get to the stories. This first one is on modern coaches or carriages. And it tells you, sometimes it is about the history of it. So this one actually talks about 1748. Sometimes you'll get some history behind it. Different varieties of carriages, how they were used. Heroines of today. So this is this is actually by Mr. Author, it looks like. So again, Godey's liked to advertise for him in his own magazine, and sometimes he would publish his works as well. So we're not going to read everything. We don't have time for that. And some of these stories are quite long. Poetry, very common. And Godey's and all the magazines had different ways of, I suppose, organizing their books and their magazines. And they would change every couple of years. So there's a lot more stories, a lot more poetry in the 1830s Godey's than there are in the 1850s, which is a lot more projects. And so how they put things together, this is just how the 1860s version was put together. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to go to an 1830s one and expect to see the exact same types of things in the exact same order. That's not how it works. They did grow and change with different times. Jesse Turner's Fortunes tells you who the author is. And so this one starts from chapter 5. This one is from a previous issue. Sometimes if they had really long stories, they would put them into more of a, you get a little bit every month. And typically when I show y'all these in the Wednesday shorts, They're very simple in the sense that I usually only show you the first page and like the title. I don't always show you the entire thing, because obviously there's a lot of pages. There's usually, for a ladies magazine of this time, we're talking about 100 pages per issue. Somewhere in like the 80 to 105, around that 95 to 100 pages per issue is normal. And again, the vast majority of that is going to be the story. So we have pillow lace working. Talks about, in England, how to make the pillow lace. That's actually a really nice illustration of a working woman with a kerchief. That's fun. Anyway, bobbin lace. That's what this is bobbin lace. You've seen in our sanctum. Another poet, more poetry, more poetry, more poetry, spring winds. Poetry at the end. Mrs. Lemon's boarding house. Okay, I've never read it all the way through, and I need to. It's a long one. You can see it starts in chapter 19 here. This is a very popular one. I think this is the first time it's published in the 1860s, but it is republished in the 1880s, and it talks about stories that is part of a segment called Stories Our Mothers or Our Grandmothers Enjoyed. And so, yeah, this one's quite a famous one that I've never actually read all the way through. It's just a little bit, and it talks about, the toilet of a lady, and that just means like the getting ready of a lady during the reign of Louis XV, and that is the engraving we saw earlier. More poetry. And now we get novelties. Novelties just means fashion, so these are particularly headdresses or caps, and they'll have it labeled, and they have them labeled as figure 2, figure 4, figure 1, figure 3, and you can read. So figure 1, so we look at figure 1 right here. It tells you a fancy morning cap composed of ribbon, lace, and narrow velvet. Figure 2, which is right here, is the back view of figure 1. Here's a fichu, undersleeves, more undersleeves. Looks like a pelerine of some kind, figure 8. Is that going to be on this page? Yes, of course, Bertha cape. Okay. Wristlets. So here's a pattern here for bodice. Here's the front, back, side back. And it tells you how to make the measurements to braid it up to a certain size. This would, of course, be adjusted based on the size of the person. And this is for a basque. And a basque is just a bodice with a skirt part to it. And so there's the basque part. Okay. Zouave jacket for dinner or evening dress. So this just says lion's velvet or cashmere embroidered with gold or any other embroidery. So it tells you a little bit how to make it. There's a project mat for an inkstand. Remember we saw that mat earlier. So it tells you the materials. You're going to need 20 cotton, 12 inches of Penelope canvas. Has 12 double threads to the inch. So 12 stitches to the, 12 holes per inch. It's actually quite large. And tells you how to make it, so like cut the square. Sometimes the directions don't leave information to be desired, but they are there. Here's corners for hot pocket handkerchiefs. So here's one, and here's two. With an initial letter, it's an E. This is a netted tidy. These are just used to keep things tidy and neat and dust free. Embroidery for chain stitch. Crochet flowers, so how to make a hawthorn or a mayflower. It tells you how to do it. How to make a primrose with crochet. And these are popular just to like put on the wall, like make a wreath of crochet or hair or knitted or fabric or paper or wax flowers, and you would just display them as part of, these are things that I did to entertain myself essentially. The ladies who are subscribing to these magazines have a little bit of disposable income. So they are more middle class ladies. Very wealthy ladies were not the ones purchasing these magazines. Very wealthy ladies didn't have to purchase these magazines. They were getting their fashions straight from the source. So Sarah Wharton here in Texas, she was near Clute, what is now Clute, Texas. She actually had a dressmaker in Paris. And so she, whenever she wanted new clothes, would go on the boat from Galveston to New Orleans, which the shop in Paris had a branch in New Orleans. She would get her pattern taken. She would, I guess, purchase fabric at that point. I don't know how that worked. And then that would be sent over to Paris. They would make her clothes in the latest Paris style in Paris and then ship it back to her. That's what the wealthy ladies were doing. Many of the southern wealthy ladies had dressmakers in Philadelphia or in New York, the big fashion places. And then they would send fabric and directions. Say, let's say they grew an inch in the waist. They would say, add an inch in the waist, or take up here, or take out here. And that way they didn't have to go every time to have their pattern taken. They would just send directions and the fabric with it to their dressmaker. That's what the wealthy ladies were doing. They didn't need to know what the latest fashions were because they weren't the ones emulating it. They had people doing that for them. So mostly we're going to see like upper working class to middle class ladies being the subscribers of these magazines. They are the ones who can subscribe and afford a couple dollars a year for a magazine. Peterson's was the cheapest. I think Godey's, I'll have to look it back up. It'll sell us later. I think it's around $3 a year, which is fairly expensive. And that averages out to almost $3 if it was $3. And that may be the club with a couple of different ones. Anyway, $3 a year is about $75 a year in modern money. Like, that's fairly significant for a magazine. But again, Godey's wasn't known for being the cheap one. So, oh, let's see, that's way better. I like that better. Okay, that one just says Sarah. Braiding pattern for a boy's tunic. There's patchwork. So quilting. Articles for fancy fairs, so like making wafer baskets, how to make baskets out of feathers, lavender, feather screens, and fancy fairs were really how middle class and slightly wealthier ladies would get together, and it was almost like a charity fair where they would sell articles, and oftentimes that money went to charity. Design for a smoking cap, embroidery for a skirt. There's a mat for holding a small vase or a glass for flowers. It tells you to get in the materials, how to do it. There's an embroidery or braiding pattern. Embroidery for flannel or merino. Embroidered flounce for a child's jacket or mantle. Here are the receipts. So this was specifically on directions for preserving fruits. Peaches. It talks all about the peaches. Okay, compote of peaches, blackberries, blackberry syrup, blackberry wine, blackberry and wine cordial. Preserved grapes in bunches, brandy grapes, grape jelly, all the recipes. Quince and apple jelly, preserved citron melons, apple marmalade, directions for savory pies and patties, like general directions, and it tells you how to make beef, mutton, or lamb pie, beef steak pie, veal pie, richer veal pie. He wants to know a little more, I suppose. So all the savory pies. Oh, here's a couple bills of fare, meal plans. So again, this is more of they would consider this a plain family, which is really like a middle class family meal. So these are for August. So usually there is, how this is set up, these are the two main dishes. Usually for these types of plain family dinners, there are 2 meats, and then here are the vegetables. And then this just means that this is a second course. So this is the dessert. There would be 2 of them. So chicken pie and smoked tongue as the 2 mains. Potatoes and stewed cucumbers as the vegetables. And second course would be macaroni pudding, which I just tried and actually was really good. I wasn't expecting it to be good, but it was. I actually made Rhett try it first just in case it was really bad. He said it was really good, and it actually was. And there was black currant tart. The next meal plan is boiled ham with lamb cutlets, and then the sides are potatoes and stewed peas. And then there's strawberry souffle and stewed currants for the dessert. I like these because a lot of the bills of fare that I find are British, which means that they are in season for England, which is not in season where I'm from. So it's nice to see the American ones. How to cook asparagus. So this is how to make vegetables. To pickle red cabbage. I actually might want to look at that later. Let's see, how to make superior peas pudding, and there's miscellaneous. So like receipt for marking ink. This was how to mark on your undergarments so that it wouldn't wash off. Even working class people, not even upper working class people, sometimes lower working class people too, had their laundry done by somebody else. Particularly if you worked in a factory or worked in an institution where boarding was included with your job, like you would get paid, but you'd also get boarded. A lot of times laundry was included with that. And so these laundresses that are now employed by this business who owns this factory where all these other workers are going to, they also have to employ laundresses. And they are doing laundry for all the people who work at this institution or work at this factory or whatever, which means you need to mark everything that you are getting washed so that it gets back to you. So that's what that is. This one has a lot about making, this one in particular was, had a lot about making things fireproof. So here's how to make light materials like cotton and linen fireproof. Now here's how to make yeast. People think that sourdough is the only bread out here. Sourdough is actually considered inferior bread. People didn't like sourdough. So there's lots of ways to get yeast. You can even buy yeast cakes at this point in time, but there's so many other ways to get yeast other than sourdough. I need to do short on that because I got kind of worked up the other day with a post about these poor pioneer women clutching their jars of starter and keeping it warm with their bodies. And I'm like, first off, you know nothing about the 19th century because they weren't carrying jars of starter. They used leaven, which is a piece of dough that was pinched off. They didn't keep jars of any. And again, lots of other ways to get bread than sourdough. I was a little too worked up at that point in time to do it, but I'm cooled off a little bit. Maybe I can do that short at some point. Anyway, how to make artificial coral, washing muslin or printed dresses to prevent children's clothes from taking fire, making horseradish sauce. So random. Well, let's keep our kids from dying from fire, and then, you know, let's make a good horseradish sauce. Anyway, so editor's table, this is talking about fine arts. And usually these are put together by Mrs. Hale or Godey's. This one is specifically about a female preacher of the Methodist persuasion and how she does her work. I saw this the other day and I never actually looked into it. Oh, I'm glad I found this again. It's 1860 August. Good to know. Anyway, talking about sewing machines and how it actually works. So I don't know if I believe these numbers. I really don't. Anyway, so by machine, let's do a calico dress. Should only take 57 minutes to make a dress by machine. I highly doubt that. I can do it in about 3 or 4 hours. But not 57 minutes. By hand, it would take 6 hours and 37 minutes. I don't think that's true either. You know what? I actually might believe this plain apron one. I bet it would take me about 9 minutes by machine to make a plain apron if I'm just hemming it all around. But you don't know because then you still have to hand gather. I guess you could pleat it. Yeah, I think these are slightly doctored numbers. Muslin skirt, that just means petticoat. This kind of looks like an underskirt. Gentleman's skirts. Anyway, it is interesting to note. This is clearly an advertisement. I don't know if I would take a lot of stock into this, but it'd be interesting to practice it. I might have to do that at some point in time. Like actually clock sewing time for everything and seeing if my minutes match up with some of these. And I know I'm a very fast seamstress by hand and by machine. So I'd be interested to see if my numbers are close to this. Anyway, it's an advertisement for Wheeler and Wilson's sewing machine, which is a lock stitch machine, like our modern one. You don't often see things about arsenic, but this one is specifically talking about paper hangings that may be colored with arsenic and are poisonous. Everyone knew arsenic was poisonous. I think people today think that they were either stupid enough that they didn't know it was poisonous. They knew. They absolutely knew. I mean, we do things like, most of us still have plastics in our house, and we know microplastics are not the healthiest thing to have, and it's also bad for the environment, and yet we still use them. It's the same concept. Just because, you know, if you already have something and you're used to using it and it's never hurt you yet, it's harder to justify getting rid of something. And so we like to make fun of people for, you know, doing things with arsenic when we do the exact same thing, just with other things. Talks about Irish servant girls in America and how much money they send overseas back to their family. Has a little thing about ventilation and keeping, you know, good ventilation, dangers of wealth. There was the Mount Vernon Association, which was opened around this time, and they get a few more subscribers to, I don't know if that was a magazine or if it's just like put forth to support Mount Vernon and getting it restored, I suppose. Yeah, the pictorial Mount Vernon. So, yeah, so this would be the one that you would actually be sent to. There's Mrs. J. Hale's boarding and day school in Philadelphia. So it's just an advertisement for that. We have references listed here. This is the point where, again, the subscribers are sending in their stories to be published. These are the following articles are accepted. So you will see these in other forthcoming magazines. You will see these lines: Nature, Gentle Words, Madeline, True Friendship, Brother-in-Law's First Visit. These articles are declined for want of room and for other reasons. So like we didn't have space for them, or it wasn't very good, essentially. And it tells you all of that. We have on hand several from this person. We haven't had time to read them. We'll report back next month. This is just because sometimes the mail wasn't very good, or things got lost in the mail or stolen in the mail. This was just to make so subscribers could see, oh, I sent in this manuscript. Did it actually get to these people that I sent it to? That's what this whole thing is for. And even says, Hermia would be obliged to the editors of the lady's book by sending her address as Mrs. Hale would like to communicate with her. So like little notices like that. We have the health department. This is on raising children by hand. And what that means is you are not breastfeeding your children. You are raising them on, well, we would say formula. They were using other recipes, which would not be recommended today. But if you were not able to breastfeed, that's what it said. Either you were raising your children normally by suckling, or you were raising your children by hand. That just means that you're using other recipes. So it talks about how to do it. You hiring a wet nurse, or you can use these recipes. All that sort of fun stuff. If you're interested in learning more about how mothers did things when they couldn't breastfeed, be a great article for you. Now here we come to the literary notices. These are going to be the books that you can get by mail if you send in the money appropriate. So it says now on postage, printed. If you ever wanted more information on the books, you can always close a extra stamp to pay for return postage, and they would send you more information on the books. It says when ordering a book, please mention the name of the publisher. I always like to go through and just see if I recognize any titles. I think it's fun. So let's go through these. They're sticking short stories. I feel like I've heard of the Iron Mask, but I don't believe as author of the Monte Cristo. Yeah, Count of Monte Cristo is the author. That's why I've heard of it. Let's see. Home Book of Health and Medicine, How to Enjoy Life. Dansbury House. History of Genghis Khan. You gotta be careful with Victorian history. They like to make up history, so sometimes you just gotta you take it with a grain of salt. They weren't really big into historical scholarship. Let's see. Ooh, this is about grasses and forest plants. I want to look into that one. That one looks fun. Hey, wait a second. Milch cow. I just looked up this book actually for a podcast that I'm putting together. I just looking at the source. That's cool to see it. Milch cow is just a popular colloquial term for milk cow. They would just say milch cow. I see it a lot in diaries. So you ever see milch? It just means milk. So like a dairy cow. And that's cool. I get to see it advertised. How much did it cost? Does it say? Liberally illustrated. Title, description of them, they are most valuable. But it doesn't have a price to it. What if I want to purchase at Godey's? So like some of them, like up here, it says price $1.23. Price $1.25. What if I want to buy the Milch Cow book? I need to know. Even this one says $1.25. Am I missing it? And most of them are around, and the one above from the same publisher is $175 or $125. It might be a little bit more expensive since it's liberally illustrated. Anyway, I want to know how much that book costs. Okay, we'll have to move on. Textbooks, church choral books. Poems, all sorts of books. And then also you can purchase sheet music from Godey's as well. So this is where we start with sheet music for the organ, harmonium, or melodeon, for the violin. Introductory lessons on mind with logic and morals. That'd be interesting to read. I think I'd find that. Anyway. And then we have Godey's armchairs. This is the section that Godey's got to do. So sometimes his little fits over Mrs. Hale is not the fashion editress are going to be found in the Godey's armchair. It's one of my favorite things to read, actually. And he just has like random things about just the magazine and how wonderful it is and how you should subscribe to it. So it talks about our receipts. Those for preserving published lately are worth the whole year's subscription to housekeepers. No 3 receipt books contain as many receipts on the subject. So sometimes it's like little sayings, and a lot of it is like how good his magazine is. Inventions, sea breeze. Okay, hope for the sea breeze. Camden and Atlantic Railroad. A chance is now offered our citizens to enjoy a comfortable bath, a delightful sniff of sea air, and several hours wandering on beach for the trifling sum of $2.50 for the round trip. I mean, that's like $60 for a round trip. Tickets good for 3 days. Can leave here in the morning at 7:30 and return in the afternoon. Under the care of Mr. Broadhead, this road is admirably managed. Be a nice little seaside retreat. Seems a tad expensive to me, but that's just me. Here's the West Point Hotel. Oh, borrowers. Here's our lovely little don't borrow the Godey's ladies book section for this particular issue. Borrowers are not forgotten by our friends of the press. Read what the Newton Star says on the subject. Those persons who are in the habit of borrowing would do well to subscribe to Godey's at once, and thereby save their friends a good deal of inconvenience, besides conferring a great benefit upon their families. Breeze there is a man of no with soul so dead, who never to himself has said, "For Godey's I will send tomorrow, then I'll neither lend nor borrow." Oh, patty cake polka. We just danced to that at events. That's fun. Cool to see that. Sometimes there's a lot of like reviews and what people thought. Here's an advertisement for hair ornaments, so like making a brooch or earrings out of hair from a loved one or a friend. All that's here with the prices. So you can get earrings from like $4.50 to $10. That's kind of expensive. $10 would be roughly $250 in today's money. I guess for custom work, I guess that's not a bad price. That's really not a bad price. It just seems like it. Yeah, custom artisan pieces. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Oh, we received a letter today with the following endorsement on it. Those who rob the mails will please observe that this letter is directed to an editor and is likely to contain a mint of money, but unless it reaches its destination, the gals in our parts are likely to go without the fashions, so hands off. That's hilarious. Oh, that's cute. How to find the course of the air when the wind is still. You find the weirdest things in Godey's. In other magazines too. We'll see Peterson's in a minute. It's an acrostic poem to Mr. Godey, so there's his name. Scraps from a notebook. So this is just hints and behavioral stuff. Our subscribers look at the notices published on our cover. They are different ones every month. Had we had 10 times the space, we could fill it monthly with similar notices. Can any other magazine in the world publish so many and such favorable notices? Infant education, that's basically like kindergarten and preschool. That's what it was called. We think of infants as like newborns. That's not really what the word infant meant back then. It's more like a young child. So infant education is like preschool, kindergarten, that sort of thing. Yeah. Oh yeah, Godey's. I did talk about, I don't think Godey's pays. Here it is. Young writers and those who have not acquired a literary reputation must remember that the mere insertion of their articles in the ladies' book is quite compensation in itself. Yeah, they're not paying. It is useless for them to ask what price we pay. It would be better for them to ask if we will insert their productions. So yeah, this is what the fashion editor can supply. This is Mr. Godey. He is the fashion editor. Mrs. Hale is not the fashion editress. That's actually rather nice for him, honestly. I've seen some, fairly angry ones. Anyway, Yeah, so he can do hair work patterns for all kinds of garments for women and children, jewelry, caps, bonnets. So you can actually get patterns for all of these things that weren't published. I think it's Madame de Morris that Godey started publishing in the 1860, who ended up being a very famous patternist, I suppose, pattern maker. You know, materials for wax and paper flowers, embroidery, infants' wardrobes. This is like, again, materials for. No patterns for the same, stamped collars, canvas for working. So all this could be got from Godey's ladies' books. So any type of these fancy work things, all this can be got through Godey's. So here's two young ladies with like situations as teachers. As I was telling you, like sometimes they would advertise. Here are things that they can teach. Here's their address to write to them if you would like to hire them. A hair dye in 4 different colors. Yeah, more reviews of Godey's. Here's how to dress a doll with a night dress. Oh, these are paintings, so you can get paintings sent to you. Are they actual paintings or are they prints of those paintings? There are no, okay, hang on. Yes, suitable paper with tints, with full directions to paint. Oh, interesting. So it's like a paint by number, but a little bit more difficult, just like instructions on how to do so. Huh, interesting. Hadn't seen that one before. There's another young lady desires situation as a music teacher in school or seminary. Here's just some letters, just another little story it looks like. A design for country residence. So here's the actual illustration of what the country residence should look like, and here's the floor plan. It'll tell you, let's see, so it tells you the building is 44 feet front, it's 36 feet deep, hall is 9 feet wide. H is the entrance porch. Okay, H right here. And then for the front, B is the drawing room. That would be like a parlor. It's a big one. It tells you 16 by 33 feet. All the windows opening to the floor. D is the sitting room, 16 by 16. C is the reception room, also 16 by 16. E is the dining room, 16 by 16 with closets. I don't see closets, but okay, I'll believe them. F is the kitchen. G is the out kitchen. That's 14 by 14. And there's a second story. Will contain 4 chambers with an additional one over the entrance. That's this one. The attics are well lighted, sufficient pitch to the roof that will supply a number of good chambers as well. I said it's more than 4. That's 4 chambers with closets. People think that they didn't have closets back then. They did. Sometimes it was easier to build them without closets because it took less materials and you just buy a wardrobe. It wasn't because they taxed the rooms. You see floor plans with closets just as well. The thing about closets is closets are they're there. You can't move them. If you decide your bedroom is better situated somewhere else, you can move a wardrobe. That's why wardrobes were so popular for so long, is you're not stuck to a particular way of setting up your room. You can change it as you wish because everything is movable. Your room is just, a rectangle or square. So you can move everything however you want depending on your taste. Yeah, the entire cost for completing a building after the design, if of stone and suitable work and pointed, will be $8,000. Here's an inflation calculator. It would probably cost more to build of stone today than that. But, I live in Texas, so that's like a reasonably priced home. Anyway. Oh, we get a second one, a Venetian summer residence. This is quite fancy. Yeah, that is really fancy. Okay, so we have A is a housekeeper's room, that's right here. B, hall, okay, right here. C, anteroom. D, library. Oh, I love the little library's an octagon. I love it. E is a corridor. F is a water closet. There it is. G, dining room. H, china closet. I, saloon. J, drawing room. K, awning. L just says area. Where is L? Oh, right here. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Fun. Information on ancient embroidery. This is a part of, we're getting towards the very end of the book. So this is where we're going to start looking at fashions or what fancy people are wearing so that you can model after them as you desire. So this is the Queen's drawing room. We give, as we know, will please our lady readers, a description of some of the dresses worn in the Queen's drawing room. So the Duchess of Wellington wore this. The Duchess of Manchester wore this. Countess of Derby wore this. So it's just like descriptions of their dresses. Philadelphia Agency. So this is the things that were sent for in the last article. So this is how Godey's keeps track. Hey, we received your money. We have sent the article. That way, if it gets lost, you can't blame Godey. You can blame the post office. So again, no order attended to unless the cash accompanies it. So, we sent to Mrs. MP, sent waist pattern on the 23rd of this month. Mrs. FWP sent hair charms, faith, hope, and charity on June 1st. LSC sent infants clothes by Adams Express on the 8th. So this is how you could check and make sure that the things you sent for, the things you sent money for, are actually on their way to you. We have center table gossip, so this is going to be on fashions. There's French gossip, how to make camel hair tassels. It's like really weird. It's very interesting things. Fresh hints on flower gardening, on hollyhocks and wallflowers. Miniature and bourbon roses, like how to care for things. Notes and queries. So there's a new disease, diphtheria, new diseases, diphtheria and pneumonia, both so prevalent and fatal this last winter. So you get to know things like that. Sugar for our tea and sweetmeats. The care of delicate children. Here's fashions. So here's the description of the fashion plate that we didn't get to see, but it tells you, figure one is usually from left to right. So figure one would be morning dress for a watering place. Tells you skirt and paletot of white peak, embroidered in red and white soutache. So it tells you all of that. Headdresses. So all the descriptions at the very beginning of the book, you would get. Here's the description of those. Chit chat upon New York and Philadelphia fashions for August. Tells you what kind of bonnets are in vogue, the colors that are popular, what riding hats are available, what colors, hoops and crinolines, the styles, dresses that they're seeing, and then that word here, fashion, with a period at the very bottom. That is the end of the Godey's magazine. The next page would be the back cover. And so this starts a new one. So let's go ahead and look at Peterson's. Same month, August. We'll probably go through this a little bit quicker. I don't want to keep y'all here forever. So here's a black and white plate. A lot of these aren't, they're more romanticized. They're not exactly scenes from real life most of the time. So like this one just looks like it's a little country time romanticized image. Here is their fashion plate. They are colored. Sometimes the Happy Trust doesn't have them colored, but these would be colored. Oh, there's a collar and cuff pattern to embroider. Yeah, new style collar and cuffs. Here is Fisherman's Family watching a wreck. Again, I don't know if that goes to a story. It doesn't say it goes to a story, so that's probably just a regular black and white plate. Name Nellie. Here's some black and white fashions. This is a breakfast dress. Hey, I have made these shoes. That's a lady shoe. That's actually a baby shoe. That's what children wore. I've never seen a lady wear shoes like that, ever. But I have seen lots of children wear those shoes. Very popular from the 1840s on up. Embroidery. There's a nightcap in crochet right here. Ooh, there's an infant's cradle. That's interesting. I would not have thought that was period. If I'd seen that, I would have been like, oh, it looks a little bit later. Interesting. Handkerchief corner with initials. Here's a cape, name for marking. There's a patent skirt, i.e. a crinoline. Seesaw costume. here's the story. So we're going to kind of just go through this a little bit faster to not keep y'all here forever. But you can kind of just see it's set up very similar to Godey's Ladies book. Most of them are. Again, except for Harper's, which Harper's was not fashion. It was just articles. Not as many embroidery patterns in Peterson's as there are in Godey's. They more fill up space with poetry, smaller poems. All right, Paris necktie. That's kind of a cool one. Chiefly of black silk and black velvet. The ends being of the former. So it tells you a little bit about them. Sometimes there are directions, sometimes they're not. How to prepare sea mosses. A lot of this is going to be like artwork type things. For crystallizing grasses and flowers, again, a lot more artwork or like preserving of things. Patterns or embroidery. How to make wax fuchsia. So again, how to make wax flowers. Very popular thing just to kind of keep yourself entertained and to make decorations for the home. And it also is just good art skills. There's a Zouave jacket. You can see Zouaves are, the jackets themselves are a little bit popular this month. You saw them in Godey's and in Peterson's. Here's a pattern for it. Peterson's has, I think, better patterns and better directions than Godey's does. They are a little bit more thorough and they include more than Godey's does, in my personal experience. But that is the jacket. It tells you the inches and such that will, of course, need to be adjusted to your body. Designed for patchwork, that's quilting. So it tells you how, like, the exact, so it tells you the pattern to use. There's a sofa pillow in long hook crochet by Mrs. Warren. New style of chemisettes is down here. Those are chemises. That is not a chemisette. Things get sometimes mislabeled, and that's okay. Chemisette is technically a different article, but we can see just the plain yoke chemise that we made not too long ago. This is more of a shaped yoke, which I'll be doing later on. There's embroidery for a skirt, pattern for an ottoman or cushion, daisy pattern for a sofa tidy. There is music here as well, just to practice. Usually it's 2 pages, just like Godey's. And we have the editor's table, so editorial chit chat, little articles, new quarterly that you could do or subscribe to, how to use applause when you're listening to someone speak, order in your household, weaving and plaiting. Hair plaiting just mean, in America today we would say braiding. Plaiting is just usually another word for braid. Apparently someone is disgusted with ladies kissing upon meeting. Lectures. So Park Benjamin Esquire, well-known poet and lecturer, now prepared to accept invitations and make engagements to deliver lectures before, can't read that word, institutions for the public hall, proprietors of public halls during the spring, summer, and autumn. So yeah, all that sort of thing. Review of new books. So instead of just like being able to sell them, you get reviews sometimes. I don't think we have time today. It'd be interesting to see if the same books being sold by Godey's are reviewed by Peterson's. Milk cows and dairy farming? Yes. We have no personal knowledge of dairy effects, but those who have tell us this is an excellent treatise. The book discusses the breeds, breeding, and management and health and disease of dairy and other stock, the selection of milch cows, the production of milk, butter, cheese, etc., etc. The treatise on dairy husbandry of Holland is added. Also, Horsfall's system of dairy management. So yeah, some of them are the same. Mother's Trials, I saw that one in Godey's, the church choral book. So these are what Godey's was selling. Interesting. New cookbook, prepared exclusively for Peterson's magazine. There's some medical receipts. So serve of rhubarb, wash for sore nipples, wine bitters, tar ointment, something for cholera, for diarrhea, for sick stomach. Again, some of them are quite blurry, some of them are not, so if you can't go to another article is sometimes better. Disordered bowels for children. Lots of health things. That's kind of fun. Puzzles. Those are fun. It tells you how to do it. It's like a little science experiment. Art recreations. Oh yeah, this is the same thing. So these people must have written to the magazines and said, hey, we want you to say that we have these paintings that people can paint. And this is what they cost. Interesting, because they're on both. Table receipts. This is going to be more for cooking. We'd say cooking receipts. Table receipts is not uncommon. Roly-poly pudding. I've heard of that. Never made it. There's sponge cake. Make a something pudding. Cabinet pudding. Interesting. Goldfish. Cheshire pudding. Miscellaneous receipts. So, receipt for soft corns. Oh, that's like for the feet. Like feet type corns. Rheumatism. Excellent eye wash. Relief of quinsy. Hair wash. All the things. Toilet receipts. How to keep your hands nice. Honey soap. Superior lip salve. To color pomatum or pomade is what that would just be another word for pomade. Parlor games. So this one's how to play My Lady's Toilet. Oh, this is like musical chairs. This is musical chairs, essentially, but without music. They all seat themselves but one, who is called the lady's maid, who stands in the center. When the maid calls for an article of dress, the one who has that name instantly rises, repeats the word, and seats herself again directly. For instance, the maid says, my lady's up and wants her dress. Dress, says the lady who has that name, rising at the same time she speaks and sitting down again quickly. My lady's up and wants her brush. Brush, says brush, jumping up and repeating her name. My lady's up and wants her handkerchief. Watch and chain. Handkerchief, watch, chain, says each of the three rising together. My lady's up and wants her whole toilet. When this is said, everyone must jump up and change chairs. As there is a chair too few, of course it reasons that whoever must be standing must be the lady's maid and call the others as before. So it is similar to musical chairs. I have not played this, but I have read this in other parlor game books. Fireside magic. So to cause wine and water to change places. How to waterproof a sieve, it looks like. And there's fashions for August. So there's the two fashion plates. Figure 1 on the other side is a dinner dress of white muslin for a watering place. Figure 2. And then there's the other like plates that we saw. So it has the descriptions of them. Has general remarks upon fashion. Zouave jackets, ball dresses, mantillas, and that is the end. Usually if you, oh look, that one is colored. See, that's what they would normally look like, is a colored fashion plate. The other one we saw didn't. And it has no notice that there's the end of it. If you come to another fashion plate, then you know it is the end. In certain time periods, like the 1830s, we'll have the fashion plates at the end, and then somewhere, seems to me like it's in the 1840s somewhere, they changed it to mostly fashion plates at the beginning. But again, it kind of changes and everything with fashion. Anyway, that was probably a really long video, and I feel like we just barely scratched the surface. Like, you got some very basic information on ladies magazines of the day. So it's not like an in-depth study at all. And I'm still doing research as well. So again, I want to know more about the types of people who are subscribing to these. I have a couple references, but not a ton. Most of the people I am finding references to are, again, middle class, upper working class. Those are the people I find reading these types of things. My main focus right now is figuring out when most people got the ladies magazines. Again, I have that one great reference from Mrs. Williams. Other than that, I really don't have a lot right now. And so I am, I want to say that Lucy Stevens said something, but I'll have to go back and look at it. I don't know if I remember. So anyway, that is my main focus on how to expand my research onto ladies magazines. But I also wanted to share with you like how I use ladies magazines. Like, yes, I do the little short just on Godey's once a week. And those aren't my well-watched videos. I still do them because I think it has some very good information. but it also is supposed to be a thing to where you want to go read more. That is why I'll always have the link to that particular article in the description, so that you can go and research further. It's supposed to be like a whet your appetite type thing of you go back and do your own research. So I will continue doing those. I know they get very few views, but I have had a couple people tell me they really enjoy listening to them and like watching them, and sometimes going and researching further. So I will continue doing those. It's not like I actually do this for the views anyway. I really do it to educate people. So those will continue coming out. That's going to be about it. I will continue my research onto ladies' books as well. If y'all happen to come across any diary or letter references to anything of the sort, would love to hear about it. One of my favorite things is learning things through big publications and then seeing real people use them. That is like my favorite thing. So ladies magazines, books, all the things. I like it when I get to read about real people using them. So that's where I am at currently. I hope you have enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, subscribe to the channel, click that little bell notification so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. And as always, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next video.